Are you going to man questions, or you want me to?
You know what? That would be great. Hello and good evening. Mia Gradney with KHOU 11 News, joined by investigative reporter Jeremy Rogowski here to talk about a story that Jeremy's been working on for some time now, and something that anyone who is out there on the road should be interested in tonight. Anyone who has children, so many of us have a reason to focus and listen, because we're talking about driving drunk with kids in the car. Adults who are out there doing it, we know it is illegal, but there are still plenty of people breaking the law and doing this. But more importantly, they're breaking the law, driving drunk with kids in the car, and not doing time for it, not facing some very serious consequences for it. And Jeremy, you really dove into the numbers here. Yeah. Set this up for us.
So, Texas lawmakers made a distinction between DWI and DWI with kids on board. A DWI is a misdemeanor, a lower level offense, whereas if you have kids in the car, it gets bumped up to a felony. And that felony does carry, in Texas, up to 2 years in jail time. And if you step back, it really makes sense, because kids really don't have a voice. They can't call an Uber or a Lyft or a relative for a safe ride home. Usually it's mom and dad says, get in the car, we're going, and they don't have a choice. So Texas lawmakers recognized that, and they said, if you do commit this crime, we're going to increase the potential punishment. The issue that we found in Harris County, Mia, and we looked at nearly 3 years worth of records, is that nearly 2/3 of the time in Harris County, those alleged criminals who plead guilty don't do any jail time. They're getting probation. They're striking deals with the Harris County District Attorney's Office to avoid jail time and getting probation. And so even though Texas lawmakers say DWI with child is up here, it's not being carried out that way when it comes to a prosecution side in Harris County.
What's the reasoning behind it? I know you talked to the DA's office and you asked them the question. What's their reasoning?
The DA's office takes what they call a restorative justice approach, meaning that they don't want to split up families. They say, listen, if someone needs help, they have a problem with alcohol and they need help, they want to be able to afford that person the help they need to try to change their behavior, get them on the path to being a productive member of society. The DA's office does not want to split families apart. The flip side of that coin is people's lives are in danger, not only the children in the car, but others on the road. And in fact, we found several cases where it wasn't just a DWI, but a DWI that resulted in a major accident. Those cases, too, also ended up in probation. Now, you can imagine Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and obviously they're an advocacy group, and they have their viewpoint, says, no way, DA's office. This is what they call a slap on the wrist, and it's sending the wrong message, MAD says. MAD says, if you tell these criminals that you're going to get leniency, it's an invitation to go out and do it again, because the message is there's going to be minimal consequence.
And you found cases, in fact, where that happened, correct? Where there was someone who had gotten arrested before for DWI, had gotten probation, had gone out and done the same thing again.
Absolutely. And the crashes, too, really stood out to us. I mean, we have a couple examples, and I'm just going to show this. This is a pickup truck that was flipped over. It was in Northwest Harris County on Skinner Road. The driver behind the wheel of this pickup, Mia, had a 1.5-year-old in the back seat. According to records, that toddler was in a car seat, but the car seat wasn't attached to anything. And witnesses on the road say this pickup truck was all over the place, swerving in and out of traffic. When police arrived, they found the driver in the ambulance. He was injured. He was, quote, shaking uncontrollably, according to the police report. And at the end of the day, they did lab work on his blood, and he came back positive for a bunch of unprescribed pills. So you have, this was a 4-vehicle crash, by the way, and at the end of the day, the felony charge did not result in any jail time, but rather the prosecutor's office struck a deal. The driver pled guilty. He was given 5 years probation in this case. a 1.5-year-old in the back seat. You know, the pictures are really hard to look at.
These are not necessarily fender benders that we are talking about here, as you have many examples.
Well, let me show you just another one. This one really stood out to us. This was the drunk driver's vehicle. It was a 6-car crash in this case. A 2-year-old girl and the 5-year-old son of the driver was in the car. You read the police report and it tears your heart apart. There was a half-empty vodka bottle in the car. The blood alcohol level came back at 0.29. That's more than 3 times the legal limit in Texas. And this all happened on a Sunday morning while a nearby church was letting out. This wasn't a Saturday night party. This was right before noon on a Sunday. What was the punishment? Not only in this case was it probation, but prosecutors actually reduced the felony down to a misdemeanor. So from, you know, a look at it, the driver here got really 2 breaks. 1, they got probation, and 2, they didn't get a felony on the record. This was a 6-car crash, again, a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old in the car.
And do you think, in talking with the DA's office, had there not been children in the car, would the sentences or consequences, rather, have been any different?
Well, DWI, and that wasn't part of our analysis, but DWIs, first DWIs normally or oftentimes result in probation. Again, our focus was just on with
kids in the car.
when their kids are on board,
So in looking at all of this information, Jeremy, and I know you also
and I'm going to look for some questions while you're asking, because we want to hear from our viewers and get into the discussion
and
here as well.
I know you spoke with MADD. What's the thought here? You know, how do we assist people, perhaps who may have an issue with alcohol, but at the same time keep others safe? Because we know just last week you reported on an instance.
I have another. This is the one you're talking about right here. Sorry to interrupt you. This is Carlos Aguilar, and you remember the story. It was last Monday. Carlos Aguilar allegedly drove drunk with his kids on board, and he allegedly struck and killed a woman trying to cross the street. We looked at his past criminal history, and turns out 3 years earlier he had a prior case. DWI with child on board, got probation. And so when you speak with Mothers Against Drunk Driving, they say this is the fear. They call it a ticking time bomb, that if you send the message that you're going to get minimal consequences, it's an invitation to go out and do it again. Obviously, Mr. Aguilar, his case is still pending and he's innocent until proven guilty, but MADD would say this is the biggest fear, cases like this.
Right, whereas they feel as if he served some type of time, he would, 1, have to be sober, and 2, reflect on what's happened in his life and how to change it.
That is their position. Couple questions here. Tony Church says, why do they even make laws if they aren't going to enforce them? She says Texas isn't the only one, and mentions Alabama and so forth. Tony, thank you for that comment. Jonathan Bowers simply says probation, exclamation point, exclamation point. A sentiment shared by many. Thank you for that comment, Jonathan. He goes on to say, what's wrong with these parents? Joanne says, wonder if it's because they're single parents with no one immediately able to take care of the kids. Don't know the answer to that per se, but as we mentioned earlier when I interviewed the DA's office, he said, we do not want to split up families. If we can get people help, we want to try to offer them help. We should also add that the DA's office says they don't consider probation a slap on the wrist, which is how MADD describes it. The DA's office will say, listen, there's a lot of conditions to probation. A lot of times there's alcohol anonymous classes that are mandatory, that are part of the requirements for probation. There's ignition locks where you actually have to blow into a breathalyzer in order for your car to start. There are other safeguards, they say, in place. Obviously, you have to report to your probation officer. You may have to provide a urine sample to see if you've been, using alcohol and so forth. And so the DA's office will say, and in fairness, they make some valid points, that it's not as if they're just letting them go scot-free. They say there are conditions on that. Again, the flip side to that is when you see cases like Carlos Aguilar and the others who go out and do it again. And we mentioned some others in our piece tonight.
Right. There are quite a number of people. I think one of the most difficult ones we're going to see tonight is a woman who is in a van with her children, and she was so drunk that when she exited the car, she fell flat on her face. And her daughter was in the car and had to witness this.
Yeah, she actually had two kids in her car, a 4 and a 14-year-old. And when you take a deeper look into that, the police report is very disturbing. The Harris County Sheriff's, Deputy Constable approaches the car, and this woman is at a stoplight in a turn lane, and she's not going anywhere. And the deputy approaches her and says, why aren't you turning? Why are you just here? Can you put your car in park, ma'am? And according to the report, the driver says it is in park. And the deputy says, no, it's not. You see the D on your steering column? It's in drive. Can you put it into park? So that's where her state of mind was. He, as a normal stop, says, ma'am, can you exit the vehicle? Step out of the vehicle, step out of the vehicle. She doesn't comply. And so he tries to open the door and help her out. And as the video you'll see tonight, as you mentioned, she absolutely falls flat on the ground. He goes to put the handcuffs on her, and she somewhat incoherently is shouting, my daughter's right there, my daughter's right there, my daughter's right there. As a parent, it hurts to watch.
It's very difficult
and
to watch.
We are not here to play judge or jury. We're here simply to say this is what we found. This is the big picture. When you look at nearly 3 years of cases, probation is not the exception, but it's rather the norm. 65% of these cases since January 2017 are ending up in probation.
Yeah, and you're shining a light on this, hoping that in some way there will be an assessment of how we can best help everyone who's out there.
That's what investigative reporting is about. You want to essentially hold up a mirror and say, are you okay with what you see? And if the answer is no, the follow-up question is why or why not? And if the answer is no, we're not okay, well then what are you going to do about it? That remains to be seen. I think it's important though to keep our public officials honest and to let people know that we are watching. We take a very empirical approach. We're not taking onesie, twosie type of cases. Right. We're looking at the big picture. We're doing the analysis. The facts are what the facts are.
Yeah. Do you want to check and see if we have any more questions
Sure.
before we depart real quick? Once again, we're going to have a deeper dive into this with Jeremy's special report coming up tonight on KHOU 11 News at 10. And if you're just joining us, we're talking driving drunk with kids in the car and not doing time.
Here's an interesting one, Mia. April says if they're not upholding the higher charge that the state law says, kids involved are getting ripped off on safety. That's a pretty poignant way to put it, and one that would be echoed by MAD. Again, we mentioned it earlier, kids don't have a voice or a choice. Right. And we saw child victims here ranging from infants in a car seat to teenagers and everywhere in between.
And your child's really a victim in so many more ways than one. I'm sure MAD would tell you, the woman who had the teenager and the younger child in the car, your child's having to witness you being handled, by authorities, and your child's also having to witness, these decisions that mom and dad make that put them in that position.
In plain language, MAD calls it a form of child abuse. And when I re-asked, I said, that's a pretty strong charge
right.
you make, and they say, well, absolutely it is. It's trauma. And trauma at that tender of an age as a child will stick with them for years to come.
Right. But on the flip side, the DA's office doesn't want to cause the trauma of splitting families apart as well.
The DA's office says it is a tough balancing act that they have to do every day. So we'll see the reverberations of this, and we'll obviously report back on any changes.
All right. Good work, Jeremy Rogowski. We will see you tonight at 10 for more with the story. I'm Mia Gradney. Thanks so much for your time.